Good afternoon. My name is Rita Glavin, and I represent Governor Andrew Cuomo. The reason I'm speaking with you today is because after we made many written requests to the Attorney General to give us access to the underlying evidence that formed the basis for her report, and she ignored every one of those requests and refused to give us the evidence underlying her report, the Attorney General was finally forced to provide some evidence to Governor Cuomo's legal team. And the only reason she was forced to provide some of the evidence that she had refused to give us for months, despite our written requests, is because Sheriff Apple filed his complaint. The complaint that was dismissed last week, and rightfully so. That production of evidence that the AG did not want to give us, has done everything to keep from giving us, it was required by law. And we only got, to be clear, I want everyone to understand this, we only got a small fraction of what that evidence was that the Attorney General had and wouldn't give us. But now we know why the Attorney General didn't want us to have it. Our review of that small amount of discovery that we received over the last couple of months confirms exactly what we have been saying all along. It confirms exactly what was in my October 20th submission to the Attorney General to correct and amend her report. And it confirms that, number one, the Attorney General's investigation was shoddy. It was one-sided, and there was a predetermined outcome. And number two, that the resulting report was flawed and misleading and disregarded evidence that undermined the conclusions and the allegations that were made. We have thought this all along, and on what we were able to see in the public report and the very limited number of exhibits attached to the report, even though the AG collected 74,000 documents, which we haven't been given. But what we could see is that there was something very, very wrong with the report, and we've said this on a number of occasions. I'm going to give some examples today of what we have learned from the evidence that the Attorney General was forced to provide to us. There are many examples, to be clear, but we've just picked a few today. What I will be doing in the coming days is I will be making another submission to the Attorney General because she needs to correct the record. She's the chief legal officer of this state, and there was evidence that should have been confronted in that report that was favorable to the governor, that undermined the allegations, and it was ignored, and witnesses weren't confronted with it. It's not right, it's not fair. There was no process, and the report is precisely what it was meant to be, which was one-sided so that the Attorney General could clear the way to run Governor Cuomo out of office and then announce weeks later that she would be running for his job. So let's start with a couple of examples. And again, these aren't the only ones, but I want to go through some of them. The first deals with information that we have learned the Attorney General had about Lindsey Boylan that bear directly not only on her credibility, but the credibility of the AG's investigation. And I want to start with this. The Attorney General in February of 2021, okay, before the referral was made, not for her to do an investigation, but to select independent reviewers, what she had told Melissa DeRosa was what she had heard, which was that Lindsey Boylan is not credible. But fast forward some months later, the AG's report found that regardless of Ms. Boylan's political or other personal motivations for making her allegations public, we find that the factual allegations she made were credible, supported by the rest of the evidence. They weren't. The report credits Ms. Boylan's claim that on a plane in 2017, the governor asked Ms. Boylan to play strip poker, okay? And they credit it on the ground that Howard Zemsky, the former head of the Empire State Development Corp., had testified that he recalled the governor making such a statement. And so because of that, the AG credited Ms. Boylan. Yet the report at the same time says that Mr. Zemsky initially didn't have the slightest inkling or memory that the governor made any such comment. But after Ms. Boylan first made this claim, okay, it was in a February 24th, 2021 Medium essay. That same day, Mr. Zemsky signed on to a public statement with 3 other chamber staffers who were on that flight, okay, with Lindsay Boylan. They're on flights with the Lindsay Boylan. And what they said publicly and released publicly is that, quote, this conversation did not happen. Okay? That is what Howard Zemsky said February 24th, 2021. But here's what the report didn't tell you. Later that same day, on February 24th, Boylan sent a threatening message to Howard Zemsky, okay? What the report put in is they said at some point after the Medium essay, Zemsky received a threatening message, a jarring message. But they didn't tell you it was the same day, okay? And they never told you what that message was. And there was no excuse for that because it goes directly to the credibility of Ms. Boylan. It goes directly to the credibility of Mr. Zemsky. We now know what Ms. Boylan sent to Mr. Zemsky. She sent to Howard Zemsky on a application, it's a phone application, and it's called Confide. That application is encrypted. When you send a message through it, it self-destructs, and the messages are screenshot proof. Using that application, Ms. Boylan said to Howard Zemsky that same day, because he was disputing her, quote, I can't wait to destroy your life, comma, your shit follower. And I presume Ms. Boylan is referring to herself and knowing something about Mr. Boylan, or knowing something about Mr. Zemsky. The Attorney General's investigators never asked Lindsay Boylan about that text. They never asked her about that text. They interviewed Howard Zemsky in July of 2021. They didn't circle back and say to Ms. Boylan, why did you have a Confide application? And why did you send him a text that was encrypted, self-destructing, and that he couldn't take a screenshot of? When you said, I can't wait to destroy your life, Ms. Boylan, what did you mean? What did you have on Howard Zemsky that you could destroy his life? Attorney General's report says none of that, and they never confronted Ms. Boylan. And then after Mr. Zemsky got that text, he changed his story. After she threatened him to destroy his life, he changed his story. The AG had evidence that Ms. Boylan was tampering with the witness, trying to get him to corroborate her, and threatened to destroy his life if he didn't. And they never asked her about it, and they didn't tell you about it. And they didn't put it in the report. And that tells you what this report was all about. We have repeatedly asked, what was in the text? What could it be that Ms. Boylan was referring to? Well, Mr. Zemsky, what he told investigators when he was interviewed, and he was interviewed first informally in July, what he said, there was an occasion, late 2017, and that he and Ms. Boylan were, quote, more than professional. And this is when he was head of the Empire State Development Corp., and Lindsay Boylan was his chief of staff, reporting directly to him. I'm going to leave it at that, but this goes directly to the report wanting to get to the truth about the accuracy of Ms. Boylan's allegations that really are not corroborated by anyone, And then the only person that corroborates one portion of her allegation is Howard Zemsky. And Howard Zemsky did so after Miss Boylan threatened to destroy his life, and presumably a reference to an interaction they had in late 2017. There were other threats, okay, that the Attorney General's office did not confront Miss Boylan about. After Miss Boylan released her article in February of 2021, Miss Boylan texted a witness, and I'm not using the witness's name simply for the fact that this was an informal interview, but Letitia James, the Attorney General, has this interview and she knows about this. This particular witness was a very good friend of Lindsay Boylan. They had worked together in the chamber and they considered the friendship close. Miss Boylan wanted a favor from her. She said it would be low commitment, but it would be big for Miss Boylan. After witness one, it was just an hour after she hadn't responded, Miss Boylan sent her another text. I asked you for something that doesn't require you anything. If you don't respond, we are not friends. And after witness one still didn't respond, Miss Boylan texted, quote, I hope your lack of courage was worth it. You had a friend in me for life, but now you don't, bitch. Good luck. Once again, Lindsay Boylan wasn't asked about this by the AG's investigators. This goes to Miss Boylan's credibility and the steps that she will take to get what she wants and do to other people. But more importantly, it goes to the legitimacy and the depth of the investigation that we know was one-sided with the predetermined outcome. Wouldn't you have asked Miss Boylan about these threats if you were the investigator? Other threats that the AG did not confront Miss Boylan about. And so you are aware, Miss Boylan's testimony that was publicly released has 7 pages that the Attorney General redacted. I have that unredacted testimony, and I can tell you that she was not confronted with these threats in that testimony. Miss Boylan had already started making threats against Governor Cuomo months before she made the sexual harassment allegations for the first time. In March of 2020, she sent threatening texts to 2 members of Governor Cuomo's staff. She was angry because she was in a primary battle with Jerry Nadler. She wasn't getting the support from Governor Cuomo that she had hoped for, and she believed that Governor Cuomo, in the middle of COVID, had shortened the time for petitions to hurt her, when in fact this was a policy he instituted throughout the state in the early stages of the COVID crisis. What she said is, this was absolutely not helpful. Okay, I see what the point is here, and I will find ways to respond. Life is long, and so is my memory, and so are my resources. Attorney General's office didn't confront her with that text. Second text, she said, not helpful, specific response to a tragedy, but please relay, well, we are okay. I see what the point is here, and I will find ways to respond to the message, the future is coming after assholes. Attorney General's investigators did not ask her about that text. These are threatening texts that were sent to the governor's staff months before Miss Boylan, as part of a second campaign, decided to accuse the governor of sexual harassment and recruit others to join her. We also have evidence in the form of another witness, witness number 2. On June 7th of 2021, witness 2 provided information to the Attorney General's investigators, told the Attorney General's investigators something that this witness had heard. What this witness had heard is that in December 2020, when Ms. Boylan was running for Manhattan Borough President and she made her allegations against the governor for the first time, the AG's investigators were told that Lupe Todd Medina, resigned from Boylan's campaign because she didn't believe Boylan's allegations and she thought Boylan was fabricating the sexual harassment claims. You'd think the investigators would have followed up and talked to Lupe Todd Medina. What were her discussions with Lindsey Boylan? Why did she think that the claims were fabricated? Did they think that claims were fabricated in order to assist her campaign for Manhattan Borough President? We have seen no evidence that the Attorney General followed up on that information. It goes directly to Ms. Boylan's credibility. And my understanding is that they did not interview Todd Medina. No legitimate investigation that is trying to get to the truth would have ignored this. But they did. One other aspect, and I've talked about this before, is that after they learned, the AG investigators learned, about Lupe Todd Medina quitting Ms. Boylan's campaign, the investigators also were given evidence that Ms. Boylan had talked about her campaign strategy with her campaign consultant, Trip Yang. Okay, she talked about her allegations that she was making against the governor in the context of her campaign and the strategy. And in real time, Trip Yang was telling this to the Attorney General's Chief of Staff, Ibrahim Khan. And we have seen no evidence that the AG interviewed Trip Yang about what his conversations were with Lindsey Boylan, about what was being discussed in the campaign, or any evidence that the Attorney General's investigators interviewed her Chief of Staff about what she was told. All of this goes to credibility of the investigation. Who would not want to dig deeper and ask these questions? And that would be because it was an investigation that wasn't meant to be a fulsome and fair investigation that scrutinized all evidence. I'm going to give you another example. At different points in the report, the investigators talk about other witnesses that found or believed some complainants. But what they don't, and what they omitted, and we now know based on the evidence that the Attorney General was forced to turn over to us, evidence that she had refused to date to give us, is that there were a number of witnesses that talked about Lindsey Boylan's lack of credibility and her historical lack of credibility. There was witness number 3 who was informally interviewed. And what witness number 3 said is that she did not find Ms. Boylan credible because she had worked with her, and Ms. Boylan once lied to the senior staff. The witness caught her in a lie. And as a result of that and her experience with Ms. Boylan, she didn't believe Ms. Boylan's allegations. There was witness number 4, who also worked in the chamber and said that most of the chamber staffers questioned Ms. Boylan's motive, that she did not have a good reputation, and that the view was that she was looking for attention when she made these allegations because of her political ambitions. None of this is meaningfully addressed in the report, and Ms. Boylan is not confronted about these incidents when she was questioned. Witness number 5, another witness who was informally interviewed. There's not a transcript. But in that interview memo, she said she doubted the credibility of Ms. Boylan's allegations because in the time she worked with Ms. Boylan, found her to be difficult, irrational, irresponsible, vacant, and quick to lay blame on others for her mistakes. Danny Lever, you do have the transcript because that is one of the transcripts the Attorney General chose to release, and she testified that Ms. Boylan had real credibility issues based on Ms. Lever's experience with her. That wasn't included in the report. Another witness, witness number 6, was informally interviewed. We have that memo. She also told investigators that she had caught Ms. Boylan in a lie. Why wasn't Ms. Boylan confronted about this when it goes to her credibility of what she's saying about the governor? And Rich Azzopardi, whose transcript was released, testified that after Ms. Boylan left the executive chamber, that she was one of only 2 people who, when they left the chamber, they changed all the senior staff codes on their phones. because they didn't want her to have access to her because of concerns about her. With all of these witnesses having these things to say about Ms. Boylan, why didn't the investigators ask Ms. Boylan about them? And the fact of the matter is, the Attorney General, who herself in February questioned the credibility of Ms. Boylan, was going to accept anything and everything Ms. Boylan said at face value, irregardless of her threats. And what we've seen in just the limited discovery we were given is that when Ms. Boylan tweeted in December of 2020 that she had been sexually harassed for years, and that many people saw this, from our review of the interview memos, that wasn't true. And it was not an accurate statement. And the investigators didn't push Ms. Boylan on this issue. Let's go to a second example of evidence that we learned about that was not included in the Attorney General's report, and the Attorney General didn't follow up on it. Charlotte Bennett. What the Attorney General said is that we found the level of detail and consistency in Ms. Bennett's account, her demeanor, and the circumstances of her allegations to be credible. The Washington Post had an opinion piece, an op-ed, in the last few days. And it asked the question about where the media was and why they ignored an allegation by Charlotte Bennett. Charlotte Bennett, when she was at Hamilton College, made an allegation with 3 others of sexual misconduct against a male student. He was kicked off of campus, couldn't participate in graduation as a result of the allegations that Charlotte made with these 3 other women. That individual sued Hamilton College, and in the lawsuit alleged that Miss Boylan, okay, who is Sally Smith in that lawsuit, quote, knowing it was false and knowing there was evidence of the falsity, made the claim against him. And after that male student was kicked off campus and couldn't graduate, Miss Boylan withdrew her complaint against him. And the lawsuit also talks about that there was a recording, and it was a recording that Miss Boylan made, in which she said that the John Doe, this male student, didn't sexually assault her. We know now, through discovery, that the Attorney General was well aware of this Hamilton College lawsuit and Miss Boylan's claim that she withdrew, and that the man that she made this complaint against said that she made it falsely, knowing it was falsely, and to get together with these other women. And we know that because there was a January 7th, 2021 interview, and the AG investigators asked that witness about his knowledge of Miss Bennett's lawsuit and the allegation she had made. The AG was on notice. Why didn't the AG ask Miss Bennett about those allegations? Why did she ask about a lawsuit that claimed Bennett made those allegations knowing there was evidence of the falsity, and why she withdrew the allegations? This is relevant, particularly because of the lens through which Charlotte Bennett viewed her interactions with the governor and how she described them one way in the summer of 2021, and then after Lindsay Boylan and Charlotte Bennett connected with each other, and Lindsay Boylan was encouraging Miss Bennett to go public to, and I'll quote Miss Boylan, help her campaign. Why wouldn't you ask her why her allegations about the governor changed dramatically in February 2021 from what she had said to counsel for the chamber in the summer 2020? What Miss Bennett started claiming nationally is that Governor Cuomo propositioned me for sex. And let's just be clear, that's false. He never did. And the evidence is clear that he didn't. The governor's special counsel spoke with Charlotte Bennett, took extensive notes from the summer 2020, and testified that Miss Bennett told me that the governor had neither touched her nor made a sexual advance. But somehow, Miss Bennett's view of her interactions changed. And the Attorney General, the investigators, did not confront Miss Bennett about this. They didn't want to ask the hard questions. And the reason is because they didn't want the answers and they didn't want to muddy up and be able to cherry pick the one-sided narrative that the report was. The other thing that I think, and I'm playing this clip because it goes to what Miss Bennett perceived to be sexual harassment. Because I think watching this clip is quite compelling because the governor never sexually harassed Charlotte Bennett. But this is what Miss Bennett said in her testimony about when she decided that the governor was sexually harassing her.
He went out of his way to comment on my hair, and this was in the fall of 2019. And this one hit me. I mean, all of these isolated incidents, like I felt like, brushed them under the rug, but this was very clear to me. And this was a moment in which I was like, that's sexual harassment. And I like very, very, very well understood what was happening in the moment, but he showed up for the day. I'm a mess. I'm working 2 jobs, I'm exhausted. I threw my hair into a bun in the morning, and when he's arriving, I say hello. And usually say goodbye, and I think he was talking to him because he was leaving for the day, and I said goodbye, and
That interaction is not sexual harassment. Petty slights and trivial inconveniences are not sexual harassment. But the report points to this incident. And this is why the report went too far. They blew up what was an innocent interaction between the two of them, and Ms. Boylan is in a rage of anger about it. I'm going to move on. There were text messages, okay? So this is what Ms. Boylan testified. And what she testified about, she also had some texts, okay? She was texting with a friend. She talks about, I will literally talk, give me $300,000 now, okay? The investigators asked her about this, but not in any strong, probing way. $300,000 now. She was not asked or questioned about it in the manner in which you've now seen the governor's video testimony. They went after him, okay? There wasn't a lot of follow-up. They accepted her answers as true. And what she says about the Bund comment is, I spent too long dealing with abusive a-holes. The governor has no idea what kind of web he has stepped into. LMAO. The Attorney General's investigators did not push on this. And there was also a text, we don't have the quote here, but it will be in my submission, where Ms. Bennett indicated that the governor just thought he was being funny. That interaction is not sexual harassment. And the question is, what was Ms. Bennett referring to when she said the governor has walked into a web with her? Again, it has to be more than petty slights or trivial inconveniences. And the report did not analyze each of the allegations, okay? Found sexual harassment, but didn't go through them allegation by allegation. And the reason they didn't do it is because most of what is in that report, most of the allegations made by the 11 complainants, even if you assume they were true, weren't sexual harassment. You might not like them. You might think they could be improper, and you wouldn't like in the workplace, but it's not sexual harassment. Want to go to another example. And this is important because, you know, there has been much written about the dismissal of the complaint filed by the Albany sheriff against the governor. And it dealt with Brittany Camiso. And you have heard me talk about in the past the many different versions and dates Ms. Camiso had gotten or had testified about. I'm just going to briefly go through those because what the Albany County Sheriff said is he now determined, despite everything Ms. Camiso had said before, that the date that the governor apparently assaulted Ms. Camiso by groping her breast was on December 7th. I'm going to walk you through December 7th so you understand why that case had to be dismissed, okay? Because there's no way Brittany Camiso wouldn't have remembered it happened on December 7th if it happened. So the first time Ms. Camiso gives a date is on March 9th of 2021. It was a Tuesday, okay? Ms. Camiso, for the first time on March 6th, after being out at a party with friends, goes into a bathroom and alleges for the first time that the governor, grabbed her breast, all right? She then, a couple days later, tells her best friend in the world, okay, she had never told this before, Alyssa McGrath. They work together. They speak several times a day. They have been best friends since the 9th grade, and this was in the report, or this was in the transcripts. She said, Ms. McGrath said, Camiso said on March 9th to her that this happened in November 2020 around 1 p.m., okay? 3 days later, Ms. Camiso's attorney brought her to be interviewed by the AG's investigators. It was an informal interview. We now, because the Attorney General was forced to give us that interview memo, we now have that memo, okay? And all the AG publicly released was her formal transcript. Well, what Ms. Camiso said the very first time she was asked about this is that it happened on November 19th of 2020. November 19 of 2020 is what she said. Ms. Camiso then gives a series of interviews to the Albany Times-Union. Okay, Brendan Lyons was her reporter of choice. And what she tells the Albany Times-Union, albeit anonymously, is that this happened on a weekday in late November. Then Ms. Camiso testifies under oath. That's the transcript that you were released, made public by the AG. And in that interview, she testifies under oath that this occurred around November, that it occurred in November 2020, but she couldn't recall the exact date. Then she said, but she assumed it was November 16th. And the reason is because two things happened on that day that struck her. One was she was asked to photograph the governor's driver's license. And that was the same day that she claims that the governor assaulted her by forcibly grabbing her breast. Okay? Well, the picture that was stamped in her iPhone was November 16th. And Ms. Camiso said, and that happened the same day that the governor groped me. And that's why the Attorney General's report said November 16th, because it was Ms. Camiso that said both these events happened that same day. And I have the photo, and this is the date. So the report says this happens on November 16th. And then, after we do a presentation to explain that no way, shape, or form could this have happened on the 16th, because what Brittany Camiso had told the Albany Times-Union happened is that she was only at the mansion for a short time. It was to assist on something with the governor's iPhone. And what we were able to see from the emails on November 16th, which I might add, the Attorney General's investigators didn't get. Again, this goes to the process, the integrity of that investigation, and the reliability of the investigation in that report. They didn't get the emails that Ms. Camiso sent that day on November 16th, and it showed that she was there with a number of other staffers. She was there to work on a speech. She was there for a number of hours, and then she left. Bore no resemblance to the story she told the Albany Times-Union. After we came out and publicly said that, there's another article in the Times-Union. Brendan Lyons. And now it's that she thought the incident occurred on a work day later that month, possibly around November 25th. It couldn't have happened on the 25th because we have the pins of when she was in the mansion. And the only day she was in the mansion in November was November 16th. This wasn't just a mix-up of dates. This is Brittany Camiso giving substantive testimony about how she knew it had to have been around November 16th, and it was because she said she took the picture of the governor's driver's license that day. And that couldn't have happened. But investigators, they don't confront her with this. So then what happens is, after we've done presentations about this, Ms. Camiso's attorney goes back to the Times-Union in October and now says, well, she couldn't recall if it was November or December. This is the first time we hear it could have been in December. We file our submission to the AG's office to amend, correct, and supplement the report. They got November 16th wrong, and to this day they won't admit it. They won't admit the inconsistencies between her accounts and why she believed it was the 16th, because of the photograph she took that day. Okay? 8 days after we do our application to amend the report, and we lay out in detail all the different versions that Ms. Camiso had told different people about what happened with this incident, okay? The initial version she told to two other executive assistants was that the governor had thrown her against the wall, grabbed her breast, and then kissed her. Well, then 2 days later, Ms. Camiso backed away from that version. And what we now have is Sheriff Apple files his complaint, and he has a new date. He says it's December 7, 2020, and that was the criminal misdemeanor brought against the governor. But Sheriff Apple didn't do his homework. So we know the Attorney General's investigators didn't do their homework, because there's no way that if this happened on December 7th of 2020, Ms. Camiso would not have remembered it, okay? And here's why. And also, there's no way that the governor on December 7th would have groped Ms. Camiso. And I'll tell you why. Between October and December of 2020, the presidential election was going on. There was increasing speculation that Governor Cuomo was one of the people under consideration by the incoming president, Joe Biden, to be Attorney General. There was an article that was published about it, October 11th, okay? Now, it's important to view the context of Brittany's allegation in two ways because of the timing of two things going on. One is the governor knows that his name is out there as someone who could be in Biden's cabinet. But secondly, what's going on with with Lindsey Boylan at that time. So November of 2020, Lindsey Boylan announces her candidacy for Manhattan Borough President. The executive chamber, of course, was aware of this, and they're particularly aware of this because she had sent them threatening texts back in March, which I talked about before, and that the AG never confronted her about. On Sunday, December 5th, Lindsey Boylan makes her first tweet about the governor, okay? That is Saturday, December 5th. Remember, keep in mind, December 7th is the new date that the governor is alleged to have groped Ms. Camiso, which he did not. So that Saturday, Ms. Boylan tweets. She says, most toxic work or team environment working for Governor Cuomo. So she is starting to attack the governor and the work environment, Ms. Boylan is. And senior staffers were aware of this. The very next day was the governor's birthday. He spent the day with his daughters. But what also happens the next day on Sunday is that Fox News now has a story. Cuomo's office, a toxic work environment, people deathly afraid of him, former aide says. That's Lindsey Boylan. Monday morning, December 7th, this is the day that Ms. Camiso has now ultimately decided was the day that she was supposedly assaulted. Monday, December 7th, in the morning, the New York Post at 9:13 a.m. publishes another story. Governor Cuomo's office was most toxic work environment. Because of these stories, the governor was briefed that morning on his way to New York City about those tweets and about the articles. And the reason he was being briefed is because he had an 11 a.m. press conference with Dr. Fauci. At that press conference, the governor took 30 minutes of questions. And so his staff had to prepare him in case he was asked a question about this to have a response. After the governor finished his speech in the press conference, he went back to the mansion and he was working on a speech. He asked Ms. Benton if someone could come over so that they could convert the text on his iPhone where he dictated the speech and send it to Ms. Benton. It was Ms. Benton's decision to send Ms. Camiso because of who was available at the Capitol. The governor did not specifically ask for Ms. Camiso to come over and perform this small task. What Sheriff Apple and now Ms. Camiso would have you believe is that on that day, December 7th, after there had been two news stories about Lindsey Boylan claiming toxic work environment in the chamber, on December 7th, the governor is aware that there is speculation that he may be in Joe Biden's cabinet. That afternoon, after he does a speech, he's going to grope Brittany Camiso's breast in his second floor office, the office that was formerly Mario Cuomo's office. There's no way that he would have done that. No way. And there's no way that Brittany Camiso wouldn't have forgotten that it was that day. No way. And here's why. The very next morning, Brittany Camiso gets into the office because we now have texts because the Attorney General was forced to turn them over to us. Here's what happens the next morning. Now, this is the day after, hours after, Ms. Boylan claims that she was purportedly sexually assaulted by the governor. Miss Kennedy, one of the other executive assistants, says, "Yo, will you send me a link to what she's talking about?" She's obviously referring to discussion within the executive chamber on the second floor about these New York Post articles and Lindsey Boylan's tweets. And Ms. Camiso that morning says, "I'm trying to find it," and then she sends the link to that New York Post article. Ms. Camiso wasn't asked about this by the AG investigators, but you would be thinking that Ms. Camiso, knowing what Lindsey Boylan had said, is thinking, "Oh my God, Lindsey Boylan's talking about a toxic work environment. I was just sexually assaulted 12 hours ago." There's no way that she would not have remembered this, even by going through her own texts. Friday, December 11th, Lindsey Boylan tweets again, "Joe Biden, if you make this man Attorney General, some women like me will be bringing the receipts. We do not need a sexual harasser and abuser as the law of the land." Okay, this is now December 11th. This is a very much discussed situation within the governor's executive chamber. Brittany Camiso is not thinking, "Oh my God, I was sexually assaulted 4 days ago." It's not believable that she would not have remembered this. And the reason it's not believable is because the interaction she had with Governor Cuomo on December 7th was unremarkable. But it gets more problematic for Ms. Camiso. Sunday morning on December 13th, Lindsey Boylan, early in the morning, begins a series of tweets. She says, "Yes, Governor Cuomo sexually harassed me for years. Many saw it and watched. I couldn't anticipate what to expect. Would I be grilled on my work, which was good, or harassed about my looks, or would it be both in the same conversation? This was the way for years." So now we have Lindsey Boylan, 6 days after Brittany Camiso claims that she was assaulted on December 7th, making these tweets in the morning. Brittany Camiso, that Sunday, was working at the Capitol overtime. And she was at the Capitol in the executive chamber offices with Melissa DeRosa and Rich Azzopardi. And Brittany Camiso is in her testimony talking about this. And one of the reasons she talks about what she was doing that day in her testimony, this is December 13th, now 6 days after she claims the governor assaulted her, is that she knew she was going to take what happened to the governor to her grave, and she was afraid to bring it up because she saw what the staff did about releasing these memos on Lindsey Boylan, because Lindsey Boylan had made a false narrative publicly about the circumstances in which she left the chamber. She had said things like, "I was forced to sign an agreement when I left. I wouldn't." That she could opt out, and she did, and she was privileged. So that morning, on December 13th, 3 memos were released. Brittany Camiso was there. Brittany Camiso testified that morning that she was the one who brought the personnel documents to Ms. DeRosa and Ms. Azzopardi from Beth Garvey's office. And that day, Rich Azzopardi was asking her, "Does anyone have whiteout?" And Ms. Camiso is the one that provided the whiteout to Rich Azzopardi. And she's not thinking, would anyone believe that Ms. Camiso would not have been thinking in her mind and not have it seared, "Oh my God, I was just assaulted 6 days ago by the governor and they're having me do this and that's why I'm afraid to talk"? No. And that's why she never suggested that this happened in December, because nothing remarkable happened with the governor and Ms. Camiso on December 7th. The afternoon of December 13th, 3 memos are released. Rich Azzopardi released them to the press to refute Ms. Boylan's narrative about why she left the chamber. And Rich Azzopardi had whited out with the whiteout that Ms. Camiso gave him. certain portions of the memos that documented that the Empire State Development Corp wanted Miss Boylan removed back in September of 2018 from the ESD payroll because she was abusive, mistreated employees, didn't follow procedures. This is December 13th, 6 days after she supportedly was assaulted by the governor, and it just wasn't true. Here's what Ms. Camiso's testimony was. What she said was, so my understanding was the box was her personnel file with her papers in it. I carried it from down the hall from counsel's office to the front office, and I gave it to Melissa, and then Rich Azzopardi asked me to find some whiteout. And I looked all over for whiteout. I gave him a couple, and he said, no, this isn't going to work. Go find me some better whiteout. All I could assume is they were working on Lindsay Boylan's personnel file. That was her testimony. And this all happened on December 13th. There is no way that Brittany Camiso would not have remembered, oh my God, 6 days ago, I was just assaulted by the governor. There's just no way. And that's because it didn't happen. Couple other points. On April 7th of 2021, in Ms. Camiso's interview with the Times Union, which she did anonymously, she told Brendan Lyons, I remember exactly what I was wearing. That's what she told Brendan Lyons. And now that we've had a chance to look at her transcript, that wasn't true. She said, I remember my blouse. I don't remember exactly which color it was, though there was no buttons. I apologize. I don't remember the actual specifics of the material. That's not what she initially said in the story that Brendan Lyons reported. I'm going to move on to another example of evidence that we now have because the Attorney General was forced to give it to us despite not wanting to. The report found Ms. McGrath, Alyssa McGrath, to be credible, due in part to corroboration from other individuals, okay? Alyssa McGrath is Brittany Camiso's best friend since the 9th grade, okay? Socialize regularly. What Ms. McGrath testified, and she also gave her own interview to the New York Times in March of 2021, talking about how the governor treated her and her discomfort. And she testified that she felt, quote, embarrassed, uncomfortable, and stressed when she claims that she thought the governor looked down her shirt, okay? Well, Ms. McGrath's husband, her ex-husband, was interviewed by the Attorney General. And we now have that transcript because the Attorney General had to give it to us. And they asked him, because in 2020, he and Ms. Camiso, or he and Ms. McGrath were seeking to reconcile. And this is what he said about Ms. McGrath. He felt that there was a lot of borderline adoration of Governor Cuomo by her, and that Ms. McGrath often talked about how handsome she thought he was and referred to him as the love gov. Ms. McGrath said that Mr. McGrath never said, he said she never said to him anything that coincided with what I've read. She never once was it ever said to me, I feel very uncomfortable with him, Governor Cuomo. Mr. McGrath found Ms. McGrath's allegations, quote, contradictory, that not only did she never communicate to me that she was uncomfortable or being harassed, she communicated both attraction and, complete loyalty to the governor. He also testified that she kept accolades, including a photo of herself, Ms. Camiso, and the governor on a pin board next to her bed. He also testified that right before the New York Times article came out in March of 2021 by the New York Times, where for the first time Alyssa McGrath now has a different version of her interactions with the governor, she called them and she said, there's going to be something in the paper, and I just need you to kind of have my back on this. And this was kind of, I had to do it to keep my job. And what Mr. McGrath understood her to be saying is, hey, I'm going to say some stuff. You might know it's BS, but can you keep your mouth shut? That's what he took from the conversation. They never asked Ms. McGrath about this. Why not? I'm going to give you another example about Ms. McGrath. During her testimony, she was asked about a selfie that Brittany Camiso took with the governor on December 31st of 2019. And what Brittany Camiso said is that the governor asked her to take the selfie, and what the governor said was, I did not ask her. I did not ask for a selfie. She asked me for a selfie, and then she said she wanted to send it to Alyssa McGrath because it would make her so jealous. And so Brittany Camiso sends that selfie to Alyssa McGrath, and Alyssa McGrath immediately texts back, I'm so jealous, where's my photo? I want to be photoshopped right next to that. Ms. Camiso has turned the selfie incident into a form of how uncomfortable she was, okay? But the problem is, how do you explain the response from her best friend, Alyssa McGrath? When Alyssa McGrath was asked about this by the AG's investigators, I want to show you how she handled it, because Ms. McGrath got caught in a lie. And the AG's investigators, in the manner of questioning her, tried to fix it. They didn't do that for anyone that had evidence favorable to governor to help them out. But they're letting Alyssa McGrath get away with this, and then they don't report it in the report. Here's what happened. So, and also, before there's any criticism, because you see that the video jumps, the video was collapsed to remove pauses, but you can look at Alyssa McGrath's full video because the AG released it. But what happens here is that Alyssa McGrath gets sent the photo. She did not know that the governor was with Brittany Camiso at the time, and then says, I'm so jealous. And then when she gets caught in the lie that, oh, I wrote that because he was right there, she then admits, oh, okay, I didn't find that out till after the fact. Why is she changing her testimony like that? And were there any questions, any meaningful discussion about what she and Brittany Camiso talked about that day and after? And there wasn't. I'm going to give you another example, and this is has been very bothersome because what the Attorney General did. So now, October 29th, after Letitia James has done this report, she announces her own run for governor, which is exactly why the governor made clear that Letitia James was not to be involved in the investigation or do the investigation, and that it had to be independent reviewers. Because he had a belief she may run for governor and want him out. And that's exactly what happened here. So what does the Attorney General do? She begins releasing some selective transcripts, okay? And what she chose to release and not release, and what she chose to redact and not redact, speaks volumes about the lack of professionalism and the political motives behind the report, and the AG trying to defend the report while she's running for governor. So what she did is she released the transcript of Trooper 1. And what the Attorney General said that she would do is, in releasing the transcript, she's going to redact sensitive information about relationships that aren't relevant to our conclusions in the report. Well, she wasn't consistent in how she did that. Trooper 1's transcript, okay? They did not redact this. They put this out there. Trooper 1 testified that Senior Investigator 1, who's another trooper, and we know who that trooper is, that he once witnessed the governor and Senior Staffer 1, who is Melissa DeRosa, that they were making out on the sidewalk like they were high schoolers, okay? This is what the Attorney General released. She didn't redact this. And then, of course, what happens the next day? We all know the New York Post loves this type of stuff. And they write a story about this, even though this was a hearsay allegation, okay? They write a story about this. What the Attorney General didn't tell you is that they interviewed Senior Investigator number 1, who purportedly witnessed this. This never happened. Senior Investigator 1, there was an informal interview memo. It was on June 22nd, 2021. And Senior Investigator 1 said he never saw the governor and Ms. DeRosa kiss. And because we were so bothered by this allegation, because we had never heard it before, the governor knows that this is false. We actually went out and interviewed that trooper. And he said, no, this did not happen. I never said that it happened. I was interviewed by the AG's people, and I told them that. So I ask you, why did the Attorney General release a transcript citing a hearsay allegation that Trooper 1 had heard, and then not tell you that she went and followed up on it and learned that it was false, and the senior investigator didn't see it? Don't you think the Attorney General has a duty to correct the record? And certainly the New York Post should apologize, as should the Attorney General should apologize. They chose not to redact that, even knowing they had interview memos, actually not just from that one senior investigator. They interviewed another trooper about this, that Trooper 1 thought might know about it. And that trooper said, no, we didn't see them kiss. Why would the Attorney General do that? Because she's running for governor at this time, and she wants to hurt Governor Cuomo and make what she thought was a potential political rival damaged beyond belief. Her behavior in releasing these transcripts is consistent with her behavior and how she investigated the case, wrote the report, and wanted to hide the evidence that didn't support her and her conclusions. I'm going to give you another example. While choosing not to redact Trooper 1's hearsay claim that a senior investigator trooper claimed that the governor and Melissa DeRosa were kissing, and they weren't, what the AG did redact is 7 pages from Lindsay Boylan's testimony that was publicly released. We have the unredacted transcript now because it was turned over to us. And what we can tell you in those 7 pages is that were redacted is that there were statements, testimony by Ms. Boylan, that were contradictory with what Howard Zemsky told the Attorney General's investigators on July 8th of 2021, where he discussed some interactions he had with Ms. Boylan. Why was that redacted? But you don't redact Trooper 1's hearsay allegation. This was done because the AG wanted to have information that supported her narrative, that she had determined she was going to do from day one, bolster the credibility of the allegations of the report findings, and to inflict maximum damage on the governor. And she did. And she got exactly what she wanted. She wanted to clear the way for her to run for governor. And so the question is, and I will say again, this is not everything. I'm giving you a few examples because the story needs to be told. I've been frustrated because my requests to the Attorney General have been ignored. And the requests that I've made about amending and correcting the report, I make them as serious requests as a lawyer with a client that wasn't treated fairly, a lawyer with a client who wasn't given access to evidence, yet a 150-page report is written, and then everybody assumes it's true without having read it for hours. And let me add this. The New York State Assembly had access to the AG's evidence, and I, for the life of me, don't understand why they were not as bothered, at least with what I'm seeing, in this small fraction of what we got, particularly as it pertained to credibility issues relating to Brittany Camiso, Lindsay Boylan, and Charlotte Bennett. Nobody wanted to ask the hard questions here. One, because they wanted Governor Cuomo gone, and I think two, nobody wants to ask hard questions in these types of cases. You can't start a case by saying you believe all women. You can't if you're a lawyer. What you can say is everybody has a right to come forward, men, women, and they have a right to have their allegations scrutinized, evidence collected, and then you make a determination. That's how our process works. But what is the governor to do now? I wish we had had all of this. I wish the Attorney General would give me everything. She won't. But I wish we had had all this when the governor was making his submission to the Assembly. I wish we had all this and that the governor had this when he's making decisions about his own future back in August. But we didn't. And the reason we didn't is because the Attorney General wanted him gone. This report, it has to be revised. It has to be redone because it was so biased and unreliable. There were too many material errors, omissions, and unresolved issues. I implore the Attorney General to do the right thing. Appoint truly independent investigators to do the review. Correct this report and use all of the evidence, even the evidence that hurts. Talk about the weaknesses in the case and in your conclusions and other evidence that doesn't support it. That's what these types of independent reports are supposed to do. and have reviewers that the AG and everyone else can view as independent with no bias walking in. This is what has to be done. It's the right thing to do, because I can tell you this, I was a federal prosecutor for 12 years. If this had been a criminal case, okay, and an investigation like this was done, and charges got brought, and I was not given access to all of this evidence, evidence that undermined the allegations, evidence that was favorable to the governor, not only would I be subject to sanctions by the court, but it would be what we call a prosecutorial misconduct. And I may very well have ended up with an investigation of me by the Office of Professional Responsibility. There's no doubt in my mind that this investigation was done in a way to very quickly confirm a rush to judgment, to get all politicians put in a corner where they were going to ask for his resignation without having read the report or having been given access to underlying evidence. I would be in a lot of trouble if I were a prosecutor, because this would be prosecutorial misconduct, and I probably wouldn't have kept my job with the Justice Department if I kept evidence and didn't address these issues and didn't make them available to the defense. So I'm imploring the Attorney General to think about this carefully. I'm imploring the media to look at this and write at this with a discerning eye. Write about this as objective journalists wanting to get to the truth. The last thing I will say on this is that, for Governor Cuomo, for him to see this evidence, it has been so troubling. What he's asked me to do, and I am doing it, is that if something isn't done, for me to take a look at whatever legal options he has available to him. And I'm doing that. And I don't blame him, because I'm as outraged as he is when I saw what happened here. Evidence and the rule of law is all we have. No rule of law applied here. This was a takedown. This was a political maneuver, and it was a mob mentality. Something must be done. The Attorney General needs to address this. Okay, thank you for listening. I think this was very important to share with you because of what has happened to Governor Andrew Cuomo. And I am available to take questions. And the first question I want to take, because the last time I did this, and I was not aware of this, and I apologize to everybody, I don't pick who asks the questions. It's, done by somebody else. But I was criticized because I did not take questions from any of the women, and so therefore I am starting with, I'm going to start with a female journalist, Bernadette Hogan. If you're listening, first question.
Thank you, Ms. Glavin. We're checking the roster of the attendees and see if Bernadette is here. Just give us a moment while we compile. We apologize, Ms. Glavin. Bernadette is not here at the moment. Well, we're going to start from your first question coming from Sonia Moog.
Hello, Sonia, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. You had just spoken about, how important it is to include exculpatory evidence, how it would be, prosecutorial misconduct to do otherwise. I'm remembering a case that I believe you oversaw involving Ted Stevens and how
Yep.
that a report came out accusing, you and the team that you were overseeing of doing just that. So can you talk to me about that discrepancy there?
Yeah, there's no discrepancy there. What happened in that particular case is that the trial team, and I was not on the trial team, not only suppressed exculpatory evidence, it wasn't just in that case, they had done it in 2 prior cases that were also reversed. And I had no involvement in the discovery, the production of the discovery, or in the withholding of that exculpatory evidence. So it's important for me to correct the record on that, because it's simply not true. And there was no finding that I ever withheld exculpatory evidence. The case was actually supervised by the chief of the public integrity section at that time, Bill Welsh. He supervised the first and the second trial that preceded the Stevens trial. In both those cases, exculpatory evidence by the trial team wasn't turned over, and they were reversed. And then the third trial was the Ted Stevens trial, and they had suppressed similar exculpatory evidence based on discovery practices that had been established in the prior 2 trials. So I'm with you. That case should have been reversed, but I most certainly did not hide exculpatory evidence. There were no sanctions to me whatsoever about that, and I was not investigated for withholding exculpatory evidence. And actually, there was an email in that case from one of the line prosecutors who was in all 3 cases, noting that I was not being involved in the discovery process. Next question. But that is something, I've heard some people say that, and it's just simply not true. I didn't withhold exculpatory evidence in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Ms. Glavin. Your next question is from Ann Thompson from NBC.
Hi, Ms. Thompson.
Hi, Ms. Glavin. The 3 district attorneys who declined to bring criminal charges against the former governor all found his accusers to be credible. Are you suggesting that, including Brittany Camiso, are you suggesting that these district attorneys are part of some larger conspiracy? I mean, how do you justify? They looked at the evidence, they found them to be credible. How does that meet what you're saying today?
Yeah, sure. With respect to the district attorney in Westchester County, and I actually know Ms. Roca, we were colleagues in the U.S. Attorney's Office together. What she was talking about were a kiss on the cheek that the governor gave at a public event to a woman. And there's a picture of it. I believe that woman's credible too. The governor kissed her on the cheek. It's not sexual harassment, it's not a crime. That's why she didn't bring the case. And the same was true with respect to, it was the governor had asked Trooper 1, he had seen her one day, hadn't seen her in a while, said, "Can I give you a kiss on the cheek?" She said, yes, he kissed her. I don't dispute that happened. So yeah, I believe them to be credible. We don't challenge the credibility, and I want to make this clear. We keep hearing about 11 complainants. The governor hasn't challenged the credibility of a number of them. What they are alleging simply doesn't rise to the level of sexual harassment. There are a couple of them, like I think there's one, this was Virginia Limiatis, described an interaction with the governor. There were actually photos from that event that did not in any way, shape, or form match up with what she said happened. And the Attorney General didn't include those in the report. And she also did not show those photos to the governor. With respect to the district attorney, I think it was in Nassau County. Again, was another incident where she's saying, I, believe this, but what the particular incident was is I don't think we disputed that it happened. It just wasn't sexual harassment or a crime. With respect to, David Soares, what I would say is this. He said that they found her credible, but he also said that based on his review of all of the evidence, they could not secure a conviction. And I do not believe Brittany Camiso to be credible for a number of reasons, a lot of which I've talked about today. And what it came down to is the reality that a jury wouldn't have found her credible. Otherwise, you could bring that case. I am surprised, though. I mean, one thing that I have not seen before, and I do think it has something to do with the sensitivity of people who are elected officials not wanting to be on the wrong side of any claims that deal with sexual harassment. And I question, cases are closed every single day by prosecutors. When I was a prosecutor, we would shut down cases. But we didn't go out there and say, oh yeah, but we believe them, but we're shutting down the case. I question why it's being done and why these particular cases are being handled differently. Because the media, I mean, I've been watching the interviews that were done with some of these women, and the media didn't want to ask them hard questions. And the media, when they had information that contradicted, they didn't push. And I think there is a real, this is like the third rail. If an accusation is made, you don't want to be accused of attacking a victim. You don't want to be accused of victim blaming. So then what are you supposed to do? It's, you keep hearing, I believe all women. And what I think the right thing to do is, because I think we're in a really sensitive time here. And I think the right thing to do is, of course, people should come forward. And it's not just women that should be able to come forward, it should be men. And I think what you have to do is say you have that right to come forward, but then we got to go through the evidence and figure it out. What was the context? What were the facts? You may have understood this differently than somebody else. I think people are afraid to do that. And I think elected officials don't want to be on the wrong side of this. And if it had been me, again, I'm not an elected official. I don't have to run for re-election. But if it had been me, I would have said, look, we reviewed all the evidence and we've chosen to decline the case. That's how I think these should be handled. Next question.
Ms. Glavin, your next question comes from Jimmy Valekind from the Wall Street Journal.
Jimmy, it is good to hear from you. How are you doing?
Every day is a blessing. Good to hear from you as well. Two things. First, you've presented some new materials about interactions between Lindsay Boylan and Howard Zemsky that I don't believe have been in public view until now. I'm wondering, is there any restriction on the release of the further materials that you've alluded to, the 7 redacted pages? And if you could just talk about why you've released what you have, but not that. As a second point there, your client testified that he believed Mr. Zemsky and Ms. Boylan had a, quote, complicated relationship. What do you mean by that? And just as a final question, I was in Judge Trexler's courtroom on Friday, and you appeared virtually. It didn't look like you were in your offices. So exactly where were you for that appearance?
Sure. Okay. So you got 3. Let me start with the first one. No, I am not restricted from releasing the information that I provided today. And then so the question is, I think probably what you're asking me is, can I release the 7 pages that are redacted? I think that I will probably make those available so that the press can look at them for themselves. I mean, the Attorney General made a decision to release some with redactions. My view is that the 7 pages that were redacted and that I've now seen, I do think needed to be examined because I do think it goes to credibility. Regarding Ms. Boylan, regarding the threat she made to Howard Zemsky, which was a very serious threat, and the Attorney General didn't ask about it. when the governor talked about a complicated relationship between Ms. Boylan and Ms. Zemsky, I think what he was referring to is that there had been some rumors and concerns about their relationship within ESD. And because of that, Alfonso David, who was counsel to the ESD, had them both in and questioned them, and they both denied having ever had some type of improper relationship, or I'll use Mr. Zemsky's term, a relationship that was more than professional. And that came to Mr. David because there had been some discussion within ESD amongst employees about having witnessed some conduct that gave them concern about their relationship. And you know, I will say this, counsel to ESD at the time, Elizabeth Fine, who is now counsel to Governor Hochul, she also knows about this and knows what was being said about the relationship. With respect to what Ms. Boylan and Mr. Zemsky testified about the relationship, my read of the testimony is that they're not consistent with each other. But I will consider releasing it. What I also thought was interesting is that when the AG's people interviewed Mr. Zemsky, what I learned is that Mr. Zemsky was first interviewed informally, and you know, some matters were discussed with him in that interview, and then when he had his formal interview, those matters were not, he was not questioned about it in the transcript. And that's one of the problems that has caused me frustration throughout this investigation, is that it is clear that the investigators would do an informal interview with certain people first, particularly the complainants, so you get an idea what they were going to say. And then between that interview and then when they went on the record, I'm seeing details that were ironed out. I mean, with Ms. Camiso at her first interview, she says this happened on November 19th. Then, under oath, she says it happens on November 16th. There's no questioning by the AG's office, well, why did you say the 19th? What made you think it was the 19th? And now that you're saying it's the 16th, it's because the picture was there. What happened between March 12th and May 17th that caused you to change on this? There were no questions of Ms. Camiso about such things as I would have gone through if I were doing this. What I would have done during Ms. Camiso's testimony is I would have had the Times Union article with me, and I would have gone through what she said at each portion of the Times Union article, particularly the fact that she remembered exactly what she was wearing. And then she told the investigator she didn't. She couldn't remember the blouse. And she gave the impression to the Times Union that this was seared into her mind. But none of that was asked about. With respect to where I was with the governor, not gonna reveal that. Suffice it to say, my excellent associate Serena Armani and I were there together with the governor in the same room. Did I answer your questions? So I want to make sure no one says I avoided you, Jimmy.
Yes, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. Next question.
Ms. Glavin, your next question comes from Mike Gormley from Newsday.
Hello, Counselor. So the Attorney General's response to some of the criticism we've had so far has been that you seem to be criticizing her for procedures that would be normal under criminal investigations, but she says that this is under civil law. Are you still saying that under civil law that these problems exist? And then as a follow-up to that, what exactly could the Attorney General be subject to if your concerns are proven?
Okay, so let me take your first question. The Attorney General is wrong, okay? Because the evidence she gathered, you know, she said she was going to provide for criminal review, for criminal conduct, okay? The procedures that she followed, we asked to see a draft of her report because we knew it was about the governor and we wanted an opportunity to speak with her about it. And if I were the Attorney General, I would want to have heard from us. And that's standard. It's standard in Inspector General investigations, where if you're investigating a particular person, you will meet with that person before the report is finalized. It's in your interest to see, what they have to say. Secondly, to the extent the Attorney General says this is some different standard, it's not. I have been part of investigations, actually internal investigations, or even take a look at the Mueller report. But when you have an investigation of sexual harassment claims, reports that I have seen in my practice and that I know from talking to other lawyers is this is what you do. You take the allegations and you scrutinize them. And the manner of questioning, okay, is going to cover, as painful as it is, that the people who are making allegations have to be asked hard questions, okay? And they have to be confronted with text messages like, how could you not go back to Lindsay Boylan and say, why did you use a Confide app to send an encrypted message that was self-destructive and could not, you couldn't get a screenshot of it? Why would you not ask her that? So there were several irregularities in this. Number one, they did not confront complainants with evidence that goes to motive, goes to their credibility, and push back on them. You can see it in the interviews. I think if you look at the Lindsay Boylan interview, it should speak volumes. Compare the Lindsay Boylan interview to the Melissa DeRosa interview. They were allowing, breaks whenever they wanted, okay, for the complainants. And then you see at different points during Melissa DeRosa's interview where they're telling her she can't take a break, particularly at emotional parts. So that's one area, is that certain witnesses that the AG didn't like and tended to go at, they treated differently. Secondly, we should have gotten a draft of the report. It would have been helpful to discuss the report. It could have been done on a counsel-to-counsel basis. I was surprised that they didn't want to do that. Third, the report should have talked about what the weaknesses were. This person is saying X, Y, and Z. You should lay out, if you want a credible report, the information that tended to take away from the credibility. You also have to include in the report, did she have a constitutional duty under, Brady versus Maryland that prosecutors have to include exculpatory evidence? No. But did she have a professional duty to the people of the state of New York as the chief legal officer to include it? I would have. If I were the Attorney General, I would have said to the investigators, you're going to lay it all out. I also understand that the Attorney General, and I have heard this, rushed to the report. She wanted it done in 6 months. She can refute me on this, but I have heard that, we didn't have enough time. Because of the importance of these allegations and the importance of them to the governor, you take the time that you need to get it right. And getting it right means confronting hard facts that aren't in your favor. It means having the courage to say, I don't find this allegation credible. You got to do that, or your report's not credible. And it's sad to me that the Attorney General would say, well, I didn't have to do that in this investigation. I would think that she wanted to. I would have. That's how I would have done it. And that's how I know lawyers do it when they do investigations on behalf of companies all the time. Did I leave out? I think you may have had a second question and I can't remember it, sir.
I'm sorry, it was just that, is there something specific that the Attorney General could face professionally or in any other way if your allegations are true.
I'm taking a look at, I'm actually looking at it now. What I'm asking the Attorney General to do is to do the right thing. I honestly feel that this investigation should be redone from top to bottom with truly independent investigators. And the other thing is Letitia James has said publicly on a number of occasions that she was involved in this, that this was her investigation, that she assessed the credibility of all of these witnesses. And that's not what she was supposed to have done. The referral to her, and the governor and she discussed this, the referral to her was not for her to investigate. It was for truly independent lawyers to do it because she had an inherent conflict, which is that she wouldn't disavow that she was running for governor. And then, of course, that's exactly what she did. And then the press conference that she gave on August 3rd, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I've never seen anything so prejudicial in my entire career. She led the world to believe that the governor had sexually harassed 11 women. And then when you go through the report, that's not what it said at all. They didn't even assess it against the 11 women. And if I were doing the report, that's what I would have done. So what can the governor do? The governor and I are spending some time talking about it. But I have heard comments, and that they really stick in my craw, which are that the governor needs to move on. Nobody who has gone through a process, knows that false accusations were made against them, can ever move on. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I represent lots of clients. I represent clients that I know were innocent and took guilty pleas. I know from my colleagues of innocent people that have been convicted. You can never move on, and you shouldn't. He has a right to defend himself. And what happened to him over the last 12 months is that everybody, I'm in the media attacking him. Lindsey Boylan tweeted that Andrew Cuomo was the rape culture king. Come on. And I know that the AG investigators didn't ask her about that. Governor Cuomo is not the rape culture king. You might not like how he ran or how the chamber operated, but that doesn't make him a sexual harasser or, as Brittany Camiso told the Times-Union last week, a serial sex abuser. He can't move on, and he won't move on until the right thing happens. I'll take one more question.
Ms. Glavin, your next question comes from Eric Wemple from the Washington Post.
Mr. Wemple, how are you today?
Eric Wemple, if you can hear us, please unmute your mic.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Hi. Yes, I'm fine. Sorry, it took me a while to unmute. So you have been, you're obviously the primary target of your criticism is the AG. The secondary one is the media. From my inference based on your presentation.
Mr. Wemple, I'm having a little difficulty hearing you. It's almost as though you're in a tunnel.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yes, thank you, sir.
Okay, so as I understand your presentation, the primary target of your criticism is the AG, and the secondary one is the media. Of course, the Attorney General's office has powers and tools of investigation that the media never has had nor ever will have. We're talking about a period of time here where basically the media was alone in sort of investigating all this stuff. but obviously a great amount of information came forth with the transcripts, and now you're able to sit back and review all this and be very critical. What could the media have done in real time, so to speak, during this period from, say, December of 2020 through August of 2021, when it was sort of just out there without an AG report? What more could have done? You said the media did not pry hard enough, did not do enough. Without the tools and the powers of the AG, what more could the media have done, and where did it really fall short in your critique?
Well, let's just talk about this. We'll take the Times-Union, okay? I read recently that Casey Seiler said he didn't know about Charlotte Bennett's history at Hamilton College, and that she had been a focus of this lawsuit against the college. And that was corrected because people had responded to him on tweet. It was all over Twitter, the Charlotte Bennett lawsuit. And Charlotte Bennett was interviewed, she was first interviewed by Norah O'Donnell in CBS. Anybody worth their salt would have gone out there, I think, and taken a look at what her past was. There was articles about her in the Hamilton newspapers. She tweeted. One tweet she had, which I find just, I don't think anyone could believe this. She did a tweet in 2019 saying that when she told the president of Hamilton College that her story of sexual assault, she said the president of Hamilton College laughed in her face. Now, all I can say to you is someone could have reached out to Hamilton College and say, do you really believe that the president of Hamilton College would have laughed in the face of a student telling her story of sexual assault? I don't believe that for a second, okay? But no one raised that. The lawsuit, a number of people were talking about that lawsuit in the early part of 2020. And nobody in the media followed up on it. You pointed out in your article, but I think people should have talked about that. And it was also Miss Bennett's, while she was at Hamilton, she had made sexual misconduct allegations against two separate male students at the school. And the second one resulted in this lawsuit where Hamilton College settled for money. They didn't want it to go forward. And that was easily, someone could easily found that, and they didn't. With respect to Lindsey Boylan, I think if you go through the tweets, what reporters could have done is talk to people that worked in the chamber, former people that worked in the chamber, and ask them, what was your experience with her? Or called out some of the tweets that were over the top and said, what's going on here? Why didn't anyone reach out to the people who were working in Lindsey Boylan's campaign to find out what the campaign was saying about this? Internally, what the staffers were saying. People could have reached out. There was an article that Lupe Todd Medina quit. Did anyone reach out and question Lupe Todd Medina? When it came to Brittany Camiso, I found it very discouraging, the coverage by the Times-Union, for this reason. I think that they went out on a limb and they published this anonymous interview on April 7th with her. And because they now own that story, the Times-Union isn't going to look at the facts critically. And I'm going to give you two examples about this because there have been recent articles in the Times-Union by Brendan Lyons, and I'm disappointed in him. The first is, well, I heard him on talk radio last week. He was on talk radio in the Capital District. I happened to hear it when I was taking my dog to the vet in Latham, and of course I almost drove off the road because what Brendan Lyons was saying is that, well, Ms. Camiso has said, this was always November or December. Well, Brendan Lyon knows from all of his interviews with her between April and August that she consistently told him it was November. And now he's buying along with the narrative that, oh, it's December. Yeah, well, that's because Brian Primo had to change it after we pointed out there's no way that could have happened. And now we also know that on December, the 7th date, there's no way Brittany Camiso would ever have forgotten that she'd been sexually assaulted 6 days before she's asked to get white out the memos. The Times Union's not writing any of this. And when the Times Union characterized my motion to dismiss the case against Governor Cuomo, the Times Union characterized it as me just talking about problems with Brittany Camiso's dates. No, that wasn't it. It was issues, there was new evidence that we had that was substantive that undermined the story. Why hasn't the Times Union confronted Brittany Camiso and said, you told us you remembered exactly what you were wearing? And now I'm reading that you didn't. And you never mentioned to me that you were wearing an overcoat on that day, that you didn't take off during our interviews. How come that story hasn't been written? And it's because there is a lack of objectivity. And then I read columnists. I've read Chris Churchill has these columns in the Times Union, and one, it's going after me, and, look, I've been doing this a long time, and having been in Washington, D.C., I have thick skin. But Chris Churchill, if he wants to write a column going after me and claiming that I'm just going after women, I'm not. I go after facts, I go after evidence. That's what I do. Why didn't Chris Churchill pick up the phone and say, hey, Rita, I'm writing a column about this. Do you have any thoughts? Do you want to talk about it? I would have been happy to take his call. The reporters don't want to hear the other side, a lot of them. And I'm frustrated by that. And what I think has happened here is that there is a rush to be the first to get out a story, and particularly a salacious story. And the press isn't doing their job and trying to get people, hey, what do you know about this? What were the circumstances of the departure? What do we know about, Charlotte Bennett? Where are the stories now? I did a submission on October 20th that had a lot of detail in it, and no one took the time to read the transcripts. No one's taken the time to read the exhibits that have come out. I've seen no stories. Mr. Wemple, you're the first. I really want people to dig into this and look at it, because the picture that was portrayed in that report was not a fair one, and I think is a false one. Oh, and let me add this. When the report just came out, I think Michael Tracy had a piece on this. I hadn't seen it, but what Michael Tracy said is the first thing that came out with the New York Times is they had an article, I think, that suggested that the governor had somehow assaulted 11 women or fondled them, and that just wasn't true. And where's the media writing an article saying, look at these 11 allegations? Even if you take the truth of 8 of them, it's not sexual harassment, but no one's writing those pieces. I hope you do now. Okay, next question.
Ms. Glavin, your next question comes from Marina Villeneuve from the Associated Press.
Oh, hi, Marina. How are you?
I am doing well. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. I was wondering if you've received, if the governor's received any sort of like notifications, like intent to sue or anything along that matter, or if there's any sort of suggestions of lawsuits on the way. And I was also just wondering in regards to the filings from July that what we know now is that Chris Cuomo had been sending along some documents questioning Charlotte Bennett's past. I was wondering if the Hamilton College lawsuit was part of that information that had been forwarded to members of the Cuomo team, and it was something that the team was aware of at that time.
Okay, 2 things. On the first, I really don't want to get into any potential civil lawsuits beyond saying this. you know, Brittany Camiso has made very clear last week she plans to sue the governor. I think other people have publicly said this. Beyond that, I don't want to talk about that at this time. On the second about Chris Cuomo, I actually am not in, I'm not familiar with whatever exchanges there were. I do know, though, that prior to July, I think as early as March or April, I had been made aware of the Hamilton lawsuit. So to the extent people are thinking that the governor's brother passed this along and that was the eureka moment, no, I had been aware about that for some time. Okay.
Ms. Glavin, your next question comes from Carl Campanile from The Post.
Which Post?
Oh, it's the New York Post.
Oh, okay. How are you, sir?
Ms. Glavin, thank you for bringing me back to court. I feel I was hearing a defense presentation today.
Hold on. Are you sure? Wait a minute. I missed you because you're a little in a tunnel. But I think you said something funny, and I'd like to laugh too.
Oh yeah, I just said thank you for bringing me back to court. I felt like I was in court today.
Well, look, I am a trial lawyer, so I don't, you know. If you were all here, maybe you might have not have felt that way, but I'm a trial lawyer. I spend most of my time, you know, in court and trying cases.
Is Governor Cuomo feels like he was wronged here based on your presentation.
Yeah.
He did resign. So is he going to run for governor? Is he going to run for attorney general? Given your presentation today, he did resign, and I'm just wondering if he's having a change of heart. Because after listening to all this, like I feel I'm in court, but what is happening? The next step for Andrew Cuomo?
Well, first of all, you're going to have to ask him that. I'm not his political advisor, and I don't know what his plan is. But I do want to address the resignation because I hear also a lot of, well, why didn't he stay and fight? And he has addressed this because what had happened, and you know, I'll tell you why he resigned, because he was public about it. Everyone had already made up their minds. Do you think he was going to get a fair shake in the assembly? The majority of members of the assembly had said he needed to go, and they hadn't even seen the evidence or read the report. Just about the entire New York congressional delegation, without having, I think, read the report, seen the evidence, or known another side of this, said he had to go. And, you know, you would have gone through litigation where I would have had to get all this evidence, and we would have tried this case in the Senate. During the middle of COVID, this would have brought the state to a standstill. And that serves nobody's purpose. And I will say this about Governor Cuomo. I've learned a lot about him. We spent a lot of time together in the last 10 months, and he loves New York. And he realized that what New York would go through with nothing being able to get done would have hurt everybody. We would have ground to a standstill. And I'm saddened because there's political pressure, particularly when these types of allegations are made. There is political pressure for every single person to say, I believe all women and you must go. Nobody wants to be the one to stand up and say, wait a minute, there's a problem here. And I wish some of our elected officials had some more courage and say, look, I'm going to read the report. I want to see the evidence. And I'd like to hear the other side. But that isn't what happened. And that is what the Attorney General's press conference and her 3-page executive summary was intended to do, was to force the hand of every elected official to get on the bandwagon without anybody saying, pause, this just came out, I want to scrutinize the report. Because now as I've scrutinized the report, it's shoddy and it doesn't hold muster. But the Attorney General was very effective at moving quickly and giving a prejudicial press conference that would force the outcome that she wanted. And and for the life of me, I don't know why we're not seeing articles about her having cleared the deck for her own run, which is exactly why the governor did not want her involved in this investigation. Okay. Everybody, it's been long. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your questions. They're very good. And I will be submitting something. It's going to take me some time to get it together, so bear with me. And thank you all. I appreciate your time.